And hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Flyers Files podcast here on BFA Sports. I'm your host, Kevin Durso. Happy Christmas Eve, everybody. It's the morning of Christmas Eve as the holiday break hits for the NHL, and the Flyers have a lot of reasons to be celebrating this holiday season. We'll get into that in just a moment. First, let's get into all the places where you can follow along and be part of this as we continue to grow, as continue to follow during various seasons for the different sports teams in the Philadelphia area. As I mentioned, this is brought to you by the BFA Sports Network, so BFA Live Sports. Follow along all the shows that we have going on. You can follow me at Kevin_Durso on the Twitter X platform, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, everything. So be sure to keep up with everything going on around the Flyers throughout the course of the season. I've got you covered as we go through with this. And that's where we're going to start with this today as the Flyers hit the holiday break and do so in strong fashion. Back-to-back wins, very businesslike as they take care of these last couple of games and get two regulation wins against teams that they really should have been able to defeat. They were able to do so. And it kind of comes on the heels of a week that started with some struggles and trials and tribulations as they kind of wrap up the first part of this stretch of road games that they're on. They are playing, they're in the middle of a stretch of games of 9 road games out of 10. And the one home game was Monday night. We'll get into that game. But as you look through the course of the games and the course of the schedule, and I brought this up last week on the show, that this was an opportunity for the Flyers to establish their place in the standings potentially, because you're off to a good start. You're off to a start that is turning heads. People are going to start talking about where you are in the standings and how successful you've been to this point. And one of the things I want to get into today, and I wrote about it in my Flyers Files column on 97.3 ESPN, is the perception of that, the perception of gaining points, the perception of what your record is, all the above. And there's two different ways to take it. So we'll get into that and we'll discuss kind of how to see the Flyers at the break and what they've done recently. We'll also look at some other topics going on around the Flyers. There's been a couple of different things, some in relation to the games being played, some kind of a broader picture. One of them is going to have to do with the topic we discussed last week, Matvei Michkov, who, he continues to be a subject, obviously. And it seems like Rick Tocchet, the head coach of the Flyers, is getting a little bit tired of having to focus in so much on this one player when it's a team game. And we'll get into that. That there was a moment in one of his pregame press conferences, this was the morning of Monday's game, where he kind of had a moment where he more or less was trying to diffuse the situation. He was trying to explain that, in answering the question, like, enough about the one player, let's talk about everybody else who's part of this equation and put the focus on the team. So we'll get into what he had to say. Sam Ersson had some struggles earlier in the week. He does close it on a high note, so we'll get into his performance as he ended up with 3 of the 4 starts this past week. And a debut for the Flyers that was impressive. We'll talk about that. And then we'll get into our usual 3 stars of the week and put a wrap on the show as we get ready for the start of the post-holiday break and the Flyers schedule after they come back from this little pause that they're on. So all the above there. And let's start and get into the week in review. And here's the results from those games. It didn't start well for the Flyers, honestly. And there's kind of the stories behind these 2 games that started the week. The 5-3 loss to Buffalo on Thursday, the 5-4 shootout loss to the Rangers on Saturday. Those kind of prolonged a stretch of games where the Flyers had been unable to put away games or unable to come through with the win. You think about the week before, they play Vegas, lose in overtime, play Carolina in a home back-to-back on a weekend, lose both games in a shootout. They get a win against Montreal, as we talked about on last week's show, but it's very quickly followed up with these 2 decisions, the regulation loss to Buffalo, the shootout loss to the Rangers, and you start to pile up like that's 5 losses in 6 games. And it's not, you might be getting points, but it's not the way that you want to go about your business. So the Flyers getting 2 wins to end this stretch of games, winning on Monday night 5-2 against Vancouver and 3-1 on Tuesday against Chicago. That really helps everything even itself back out and gives a clearer picture that the Flyers are still involved in this race, because this is where I'm coming from with the perception of points. When before you have those wins, you can go back the previous 9 games. The Flyers had a 3-2-4 record, and you could just on one hand you can say that's points in 7 out of 9 games. That's really good. You're getting points consistently. Or you can look the other way and say you've lost 6 out of 9 games. Not as good. So the 2 wins this week helped to balance that out. And now the Flyers have points in 9 of their last 11 games. They have a 5-2-4 record in that time, which you're still losing games more than you're winning games. But when you add up the point total, 14 points over the course of 11 games sounds a lot better, and it helps you keep pace. And regardless of how they have gotten the points, and the overall 19-10-7 record, which again, it's just 19 wins, 17 losses when you really look at it, if you want to be on that side of the equation. Here's what we know. The Flyers woke up this morning going into this break in second place in the Metropolitan Division. They're third in the conference, second by points percentage. They are sixth in the NHL, fifth by points percentage. So regardless of how you want to perceive the way they get their points, the number of times they've gone to overtime, won games in overtime or a shootout, whatever way you want to look at it, the standings are telling you this team has consistently been able to put it together and gain points and improve their standing position as a result. And this is what I was trying to explain with last week, that going into the final 8 games of the month, and they had started it with the win against Montreal, that you had a chance to rise in the standings by playing teams that you have a shot to win games against. Buffalo was where that started, based on where we left off with the last show. Buffalo was where that started. Buffalo had gone through significant management changes. They come out, and since then Buffalo has continued their hot streak. So the Sabres are kind of announcing their presence in the race a little bit more as this goes on. But you end up losing a game in regulation that you controlled for 35 minutes and then watched fade away over the last 5 minutes of the second period, continue through the third. It's a 1-goal game late. You're just not able to get the tying goal, and you get no points out of a game that you felt like you were on your way to potentially winning, maybe deserved a better fate with the chances you were getting in the first half of that game, and you get nothing to show for it. So nothing happens. There's a regulation loss in the midst of these 8 games. And then the Ranger game happens, and you're playing a team that struggles on home ice this year, didn't have many wins at home. And you don't just go out and it's not like the Rangers just come out and start taking a lead and start playing better than you. You're in control of this one too. After the first period where you're trailing 1-0, you go and score the next 3 goals, take a 3-1 lead, give one up, get it back, go into the third period with a 4-2 lead. Everything's looking pretty good. And then it slips up again and you give up 2 goals. It forces overtime and you get to a shootout and you lose. And a game that looked like you were on your way to getting 2 points, you only get 1. And it kind of fit the narrative of what happened in the Carolina games or the Vegas game. And you're just coming away with 1 point at a time, not getting the wins, not establishing your place. As that continued on, and now you're like I said, that turned into losing 5 out of 6 games. I was starting to wonder, well, they're not exactly running with what this schedule is giving them. It's been a brutal schedule in terms of the amount of games being played over a short period of time, but you've got opponents that you feel like you should be able to win against, and you've put yourself in position to win those games and just haven't been able to close. So Monday became very important because I think, whether you lose that game in regulation or in a shootout or overtime or whatever, a loss in that game already kind of puts you up against, I had said over the 8 games, the number I was looking for was 5 wins. They got 1 against Montreal, and then you're sitting there going, okay, 1-1-1 through 3 of them. You really kind of don't have much room to slip up over the next handful of games if you want to get to that number, that 5-win total, to kind of establish your place. They take care of business against Vancouver. They do the same against Chicago, and now they're 3-1-1 over 5 of these games, 3 more to go, all against teams that again, you should be able to potentially win games against. And they need 2 wins out of 3 in those games to get to that 5-win total. And they've already got a game that went beyond regulation that they got a point out of. So they have room to play with. And listen, they might be able to run the table with this and win 3 straight coming out of the break. They might not. It could go either way. But this is where you have the chance to establish what you're trying to accomplish and put yourself in, and not even put yourself in. They're now in that position. So how do you maintain it? Well, certainly when you have games in front of you like what they have coming out of the break, that's how you do that. So they're off to, to put themselves in this position is impressive. It's unexpected. And you're getting closer and closer, especially if this carries on for the next 3 games that get you into the new year. You'll be at 39 games played and potentially right there with the best teams in the division, the best teams in the conference, the best in the league. That's impressive. It's not expected that they were going to be here in this spot, and they're doing it collectively as a team. Whether it's because they're getting great goaltending from Dan Vladar, or they're getting points on a regular basis from Trevor Zegras or anybody else on the roster, it doesn't matter. You are getting wins and getting points, and that's what keeps you in the running. Simple as that. So for now, that's a big benefit to them. It's helping them really put together something that could keep going and go further. But for the time being, especially now, especially when you get a few days like they'll have to reflect on it, appreciate what they've done so far, because it certainly wasn't expected. And now that they've taken care of business in the last 2 games, you're going into this on a high note, and you can come out on an even bigger note with the next 3 games and maybe create even more separation. So that's a big thing for the Flyers as they get out of the break. But for now, enjoy it and enjoy the holiday season for what it is, because they're in a great spot as they go into that break. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that everything has been perfect in the world of the Flyers for the last handful of days, because there was a moment. It kind of goes over the course of 2 games. There was a moment in Saturday's game against the Rangers where cameras picked up that there was an exchange between Matvei Michkov and Rick Tocchet, and it wasn't really necessarily a bad exchange or like an argument or anything like that. Tocchet looks like he's actually more or less diffusing the situation, understanding what the player is frustrated about, trying to understand. Michkov is definitely frustrated, but it doesn't seem like Tocchet is giving it right back to him. He's listening, kind of gives him a pat on the shoulder, like, I hear you, and that type of thing. So it wasn't necessarily something that needed to be made into a huge deal, but it's picked up on camera. So the next chance that it really kind of comes up is Monday, when they're preparing to face the Vancouver Canucks. And the start of Rick Tocchet's press conference, outside of who is the goalie tonight and what's your lineup look like and things like that, the typical logistical questions that most coaches get on game day to just put out there who the goalie is and things like that, there starts to become a theme with where the questioning goes. And we have the video from the Flyers of pregame. So this is the Flyers head coach, Rick Tocchet, Monday morning, after he answered the first couple logistical questions about goalie and lineup and things like that. This is where the press conference went.
Cameras caught in the Rangers game a little interaction with Michkov and Yogi and you. I just was wondering what your perspective.
It happens all the time. Yeah. This is not Mitch. It's just a story because it's Mitch. It wasn't even an argument. It was about when he should switch and not with Barkey. And he's getting it, when to switch and when not in the power. But that was all. He was just getting frustrated on when to switch and when he shouldn't switch. I know a lot of media people like to let him do what he wants, but there's a time to switch and when to switch. And that's really what it comes down to.
You've talked about, as he's sort of adjusting this season, he's kept the right attitude off of the ice behind closed doors with you. Have you seen that continue? But at the same time, he's obviously getting frustrated at times too, I would think, when he's not scoring.
Yeah, any high, guys that want to score goals, they get frustrated, but you can't let it affect your overall game. You got to continue to go to the spots. Keep going to the middle. Keep getting to that that slot area when we already have 2 guys down low. Like, don't go behind the net. Like things like that, he's just got to stay with it because he'll get those chances. He had some chances against the Rangers. He had a half a breakaway. He had two half of breakaways. Now he's got to play a little faster and separate himself. That's what he comes down to. You can't get frustrated and just keep working.
When you mentioned the switching with Barkey, is that we talked about, I think it was in Buffalo, about his sometimes take maybe too short of a shift. Is it in relation to that, where it's coming up too soon or staying on too long, or?
Well, he comes off if he's, we tell our players when you're tired, get off. So if he's tired after 20 seconds, get off. I don't know. What do you want me to say? People, yeah, he's getting enough shifts. He's coming off short because sometimes he's tired. I don't know what the big deal of that is. And
I saw you working with him today. It seems like he's willing to want to work on things, and he's a competitive guy. Have you just appreciated his sheer competitiveness?
I've asked, we're 10 and what are we, 17 and 10. We got a good record. I've answered 6 Michkov questions. I mean, enough's enough, guys. I'm getting a little. I mean, we got Vladar having a great year. Drysdale playing really good 5-on-5 for us. Yorkie's doing a really good job. Like, we got a lot of other players playing good in team games. So, I mean, this is the 5th question. I mean, I know you guys, I appreciate it, but you're trying to make something that's not. He's got to learn to play the game, and he's trying. And he's a lot better defensively. He's a lot better playing a team game, and that's how you win hockey. It's not about catering to one person. I hate to tell you guys. That's it.
So there's the Flyers head coach, Rick Tocchet, and you see how that kind of progressed, right? It starts off, sure, it's a question about the exchange on the bench, happens all the time. What goes into maintaining a player like this who has a lot of skill, wants to score, isn't scoring like he wants to. How do you kind of keep him composed and keep him from getting too frustrated and too inside his head? He answers that, trying to understand what the switch meant, talking about switching with Barkey and things like that. And then kind of as it evolves, another question. And look, Rick Tocchet's response here was understandable to me. This team is about more than Matvei Michkov, especially at 21 years old. He has a lot of career left. His development path is not finished. There's time for him to grow into the player that carries such high expectations. And, sometimes this happens with players. It's his 2nd season in the NHL. He had a really good rookie year. He gets through being coached hard by John Tortorella and has a successful rookie season. And he's taken a step back this year. And there are many reasons for it. And we've covered this before. He he admitted he didn't train over the offseason the way that he probably should have. And he wants to make changes to that. And he's going to try to utilize the Olympic break as part of that. So he's already put out there part of the reason why this isn't going the way that he hopes it is. And that's all there is to it. It's harder to recover from that once you get into the depths of the season. It's hard to physically put yourself in that position to be prepared for the long stretches of games and to physically be able to handle. If you're not in shape when you come into training camp, it's going to be hard to get yourself into shape once everything really gets rolling. And now they're 36 games into the season. He's played every single game. They keep giving him a chance to kind of work his way out of it. And some games he plays really well, and some games he doesn't. And again, aside from things like the overtime usage and putting him on a power play with certain personnel to try to maximize the skill set, I'm not sure what more you can try to accomplish with him at 5-on-5 if he's not just naturally demanding more ice time. There are games where he looks really good and games where he doesn't, and that's all there is to it. As someone who is in the media, goes to the press conferences, gets in front of players and Tocchet, I also understand the point of the questions. This is what people want to know about. These are questions that deserve to be asked because the fans want to know. The fans want to know what's going on with Michkov. They want to know what the coach thinks about it. They want to understand that player-coach relationship and how they're trying to mold it so that the player takes the steps that they want him to take. And then I understand why Rick Tocchet is sick and tired of having to answer questions and make the entire narrative of the season be about one player and be, there's more involved to this as he goes into in that answer. He talks, he mentions Vladar's season. He mentions Jamie Drysdale. He mentions a whole bunch of other stuff that goes into it. Cam York was brought up. There's more to it than just that. And he's trying to explain that. And then he proceeds to compliment Michkov on what he's done away from the puck and his play defensively and things like that, and how he's trying and he's learning and all of that. I just keep standing by what I said last week about Michkov in general, which is I don't see an issue here with the 5-on-5 usage or game plan or anything like that, because he hasn't demanded more ice time. And he's also continued to take penalties, and penalty minutes are going to take away from the opportunity that he has to get out there and continue to play more minutes. He's got to utilize what he's getting now and demand more, and I think he can do that. So I'm not sure how much more we can kind of take on a day-to-day basis with this, because it's not going to change overnight. Like I said, he's not going to just suddenly be in better shape or not be tired after 30-40 seconds of a shift and then come off or something like that. It's part of the process with him. So it was just an interesting exchange, because it feels like it's something that's getting to Rick Tocchet. And on one hand, you understand you don't want to be asked about him every single day. On the other hand, because it's such a fan-driven topic, it's almost like Tocchet cares about the fan perception when you're the one in charge anyway. If you agree with the way that you're handling things, and maybe more so than if you believe in it yourself as the head coach, if you're backed by management, that everybody's in agreement, you're doing the right thing. His usage is his usage. He needs to earn it, all of those things. Then why is there a problem here? Sure, people may be asking for more out of him. They want to see more of him. They've been sold that he's the face of the franchise, and this year he's not living up to that. But that's part of the process for a player that's 20, 21 years old and is still taking steps to grow. And I think part of this also falls on Michkov to change that narrative, possibly this season, but really next season. Okay, year one was really good for the circumstances, and he had, he sat out a couple of games as a healthy scratch and was benched a few times, and that's the John Tortorella way of doing things as a head coach. This year he's playing every game, but the minutes are down because he's not being put in roles that you typically see sometimes, or he's trying to figure out. One of the things I kind of thought about with this is, and as I watch him, I see it more and more. Is it really a problem if what they're trying to turn him into? Because I see it all the time. They're trying to make it, look at them trying to make him a checker. Look at him trying to make him that third line role guy that isn't all about offensive skill set, that scores goals on occasion, but really is out there for the defensive purposes. And I kind of wonder, what if they're really just trying to develop him into what Tyson Forrester is, who's good on the puck, good on the boards, goes in on the forecheck, wins battles, but also has the potential to score 30 to 40 goals. Is that a problem? Is that really a problem if they're trying to turn him into an all-purpose player, an all-around player, and that's part of the development? I don't believe so. And then I watched, he's currently playing kind of in the Forrester role, at least by line combinations, with Noah Cates and Bobby Brink. And Bobby Brink was a player for the last several years that I would watch and say, this is a guy who needs to get in the gym more because he's getting pushed around a little too much. And Brink is better for it because it seems like he's done that. And I wonder if that's the same process that needs to happen with Michkov. You got to bulk up a little more. And I think he came in great shape last year, and that's why he was able to kind of hold his own. This year, you come in out of shape. You're not as physically there as you should be. It's going to look this way. And I think that that's one of the steps he has to take, is better preparation. So I want to get into another player that gets some conversation. And he wasn't mentioned in that answer by Rick Tocchet, by the way, where there was his counterpart was, his tandem partner was. That's Sam Ersson. And Sam Ersson's numbers, if you just looked at the numbers and didn't have any context to the games themselves, you'd already be concerned by the numbers. And then if you watch the games, it kind of becomes doubly concerning, because then you start seeing the areas where he's not delivering as he should at his position. Now, this became a big topic after Saturday because the Flyers had a 4-2 lead, and there was a leaky third goal. Fourth goal comes on the power play, but it goes right through his legs. He didn't make a save in the shootout, and he's been really good in the shootout, obviously. And right away, I think everybody jumped, and it's just based on the track record of the last handful of games he had played, and goes, he single-handedly lost the team the game. I don't believe that. Watching the Ranger game, I don't believe that he was the one reason that they lost the game. There were turnovers, there were mistakes. You think about Owen Tippett turns the puck over in the neutral zone, it turns into a goal. Rasmus Ristolainen takes a delay of game penalty with 3 minutes left in a 1-goal game and puts the Rangers on the power play where they're able to tie the game. You had 2 power plays in overtime, 4-on-3. Aren't able to just put the game away right there. There's plenty of mistakes that were made that prevent you from winning that game. And it wasn't just the goalie was bad. But there is a perception here, and I think he plays a role just by the numbers that he has that say that, but there's a feel watching him in goal versus Dan Vladar in goal, and it's something that I feel in the building when I go to the home games and things like that. When Vladar's in goal, there's just this level of confidence. There's this expectation that no matter what kind of shot you're getting, no matter what the situation is, he's going to make the save. And I feel like it's the opposite with Ersson, where you're looking at, is he going to make the next save? Is the soft goal coming? And that's the difference. And it can make a world of difference in terms of the confidence you have in a team going forward. I will say this about Ersson's game. Tuesday, I think, was big for him. This game against Chicago, allowing only 1 goal, making all the saves you're supposed to make. He came up with a really big one with about 7 minutes left that keeps it a 1-goal game. Eventually, they got an empty netter to win the game. That gives you something to feel good about, and it gives you something to build on when you come out of the break. They needed him more this week than anticipated. It sure seemed like everything was lining up. He gets the start in Buffalo. They don't win the game. It looks like Vladar is going to start the Ranger game, and then he's unavailable. So they have to use Ersson. They call up Alexei Kolosov to back up for that game. Vladar was back by Monday, but that meant, now you're into a back-to-back situation. It's not like you just all of a sudden get Vladar back for that Monday game against Vancouver and then say, well, he's in for the next 2 because he didn't play all week last week. It's not that simple. It's a back-to-back, and you don't want to overuse a goalie that just came back from an injury, whatever he was going through that kept him out of the Ranger game. So Ersson's getting another start in there, and it means he's starting 3 of the last 4 games when you're trying to build points. So I think that was a big game for him to get back on the right side of things, to win a game, to feel like you've done something that is more in line with what you feel like your skill set is, your ability can be, and helps the team. And because it was kind of going that direction, right? Like Vladar was winning regularly, he's helping the team, and Ersson's hurting the team. And that's the way that it was perceived. You can't deny Ersson had a good game on against the Blackhawks and can build on that going forward so that you feel like you have, because you're going to need down the stretch, you're going to need both guys. You're going to have more back-to-back situations. You're going to have more situations where you got to be careful about Vladar's usage because he's already 2/3 of the way to his career high in appearances. And you've got more than half of a season to go. So you're going to have to keep the balance. I don't think you want Vladar to get up to 60 games played because he's been playing so well. You're going to have that balance. So Ersson playing well and getting back to form and maybe building on those numbers to back it up is going to go a long way. And that's what they really need to see from him. And I think that Tuesday was a good start for that, making 20 saves on 21 shots, coming through in the third period when, you're defending a 1-goal lead. You're trying to come away with 2 points again for the second straight night. And you're able to do that because your goalie was part of the equation. So good for him, and good for the Flyers that they get that kind of performance going into the breaks. They have something to feel confident about going forward, because as much as they've expressed that self-belief in the room, the players have with both goalies, Vladar's numbers were clearly better, and by far not just better, but Vladar's playing at elite level based on what his numbers are, because that's just the way the league is. There's not many guys who have numbers like Vladar has this season. There's more guys who have numbers actually like Ersson has, but you don't want to have a guy who's included in that bunch. You want, even if Ersson can get to above average based on where that number is, that's helpful to your team. So that was a big step for him, that game on Tuesday night. I want to shift gears to the last player I really wanted to talk about in all this, and that's Denver Barkey, who gets called up ahead of Saturday. And there was multiple reasons for it. You can, on one hand, the Flyers made some pretty significant changes to the lineup going into Saturday, because Garnet Hathaway hasn't been able to even register a point yet this season and hasn't looked like the player he has for the last couple of years for the Flyers, and they decide to sit him down as a healthy scratch for that game. And eventually this has turned into 3 straight games that Hathaway has not played. Barkey comes into the picture, and I was a little surprised by his call-up. And Barkey was also up potentially because of an injury to Christian Dvorak that kept him out of Saturday's game. Dvorak did return by Monday, and Barkey was still in the lineup. But I was a little surprised by his call-up because I think that through the course of this, whether you're trying to look at it was another injury like what was going on with Dvorak, or trying to replace Tyson Forster, you kind of thought the next guy in line after the 2 most obvious in-house options. They tried Nikita Grabenkin in an elevated role. It didn't quite work out. They elevated Carl Grundstrom for a few games. He had some good production early that started to dip. Maybe it was time for the next step. I think everybody would have anticipated Alex Bump as the next guy in line because he just has more of that experience playing a pro-style game, I guess you could call it, because of the college experience and what he was able to do, in the playoffs last year with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms and playing in the AHL out of his college season and things like that. So all of that made it seem like he was the next guy in line, and instead it's Barkey. And now Barkey comes from a program playing with the London Knights in juniors. That's as close to pro ready as you're going to get. So I'm not going to deny that he had a fast track potentially, because as long as he's able to maintain what his game is all about, which is that despite being a smaller player, he's got a compete level. He's got a motor that just doesn't quit. His will is on display at all times. So he's a player with a ton of heart and determination to make it and be successful at every level. And that's what keeps you in the league. And he comes out in his first game, and right away, the Flyers scored 2 goals to take a lead after giving up the first one against the Rangers, and he assists on both of them. And it's not just, a secondary assist where you were more or less a non-factor in the play, but you get the assist. He's the primary assist on both goals. He's making great passes, finding open guys, really making an impact. He nearly scored a couple of times in that game too to get his first goal. He wasn't able to do that. And then he had a couple situations against Vancouver where he did. And then unfortunately against Chicago, he plays 2 periods where mostly involved. It was probably his weakest game out of the bunch, but it was also his 3rd game in 4 days at the NHL level for a change. And he ends up leaving the game after the second period because after taking a penalty, he takes a boarding penalty, and Chicago comes in. They want to defend their player, so they're going after him a little bit, and it kind of looked like he got shaken up a little bit and then just wasn't able to return. Now he's got the break, and we'll see where that goes, but you hope that it's not anything too serious because you were starting to enjoy the Denver Barkey NHL experience because of just how energetic and active he is. He's seemingly all over the place and seems like the puck follows him around. So that's always a positive. And now you have to wonder whether or not he's going to be part of the lineup going forward because of what happened in this game on Tuesday, whether that's an injury that keeps him out for a little bit or whatever the case may be. But Barkey is certainly an interesting player, and I kind of want to see how much he can run with this opportunity, because some guys don't need a lot of time in the AHL, and it's not because they don't, they're not developed enough or it has to do with development. Sometimes guys just respond better when you give them a chance to jump into the NHL. I think about what they did with Ty Murchison earlier this month with the injuries they had on the blue line. Murchison was probably nowhere near the top of the list for anybody to get a call up. He gets into a game, looks good, plays 2 more, still holds his own, and then he ends up going back down when everybody gets healthy. I don't know if that's going to be the case with Barkey per se, because you have spots at the forward position that you could be looking to fill. Forster isn't coming back during the regular season. You have to factor that in. And maybe Barkey's just wired to play in the NHL. Simple as that. Doesn't need to spend as much time in the AHL. So all of that coming into play, you just want to see what kind of game he's able to bring. And as a result of that, it's unfortunate that now there's possibly an injury in question, because he sure looked like he was knocking on the door for the first NHL goal. He's already got 2 assists. It was a positive first impression. And, when you get your coach saying afterwards, I'll be fighting for him to stay in the lineup, that goes a long way, and to make that kind of impression. There are guys who can come in and just look fine and look like they can handle it, but not necessarily are driving play. He looked like he was driving play right out of the gate, and that's pretty big for him. So we're going to get closer to putting a wrap on the show. Let's start by going into our Flyers 3 stars of the week. We'll start with star number 3. It's Noah Cates. Noah Cates had 2 goals, 2 assists for 4 points this week, scored against Chicago, which was the eventual game-winning goal. Good week for him, and not necessarily anything that was overly impressive. He didn't have like a standout game where he was the number one guy, but he continues to have consistency to his game. He continues to contribute on the offensive side. He's been really good defensively, handling tough assignments. And maybe that's been a little bit lesser lately given some of the competition, but he puts a lot of emphasis on the defensive side of things and being an all-purpose player. And he had a really good week with the production to go with it, which helps bring him into this conversation where he's one of the top players of the week. Star number 2, and this is going to be no surprise because he just keeps doing things, is Trevor Zegras. And not necessarily the goal-scoring week for him. He only had 1 goal over the course of the last 4 games, but 3 assists. His point streak is up to 9 games. He just continues on a nightly basis to keep contributing in different ways and making big plays. And let's not forget also that on top of everything, I brought up only 1 goal over the last 4 games. One of his assists comes on a goal by Christian Dvorak against Vancouver that he gets the initial shot. It goes high and over the net, off the glass, kind of comes back, and Dvorak's able to bat it into the net. And so he gets an assist on it, but he gets the really good scoring chance to be able to potentially score there on the rush, and that could have been a goal. He had a chance late in the game against Chicago that went off the post. So he's right there, and it continues to be a thing for him this year. The numbers for him just continue to climb. He's going to, based on everything, he's going to break all of his career marks to this point. 23 goals on it is his career high in goals for a season. He's at 15. 65 points is his career high, and he's already up to, he's a point per game player to this point. So he's already up in the, the mid 30s here, and continues to just keep doing this regularly. And at some point, you just have to acknowledge that this might be the type of player he's able to be, because he's making things happen. The pass he makes to Travis Konechny on the first goal of the game against Chicago should tell you everything you need to know about his confidence level, his playmaking ability. It's beyond goal scoring with him. He's able to make a lot of plays, and that's certainly what's helped him be the team leader in points and continue to contribute to the rate that he has. And finally, the first star of the week, just mentioned him. It's Travis Konechny, who had 2 goals, 2 assists for 4 points. And, it's been helpful. He's now kind of the line that he's been on by playing with Zegras, playing with Christian Dvorak. It's a line that right now is going through a hot streak, and you don't want to break it up because everybody's contributing. That goes a long way to establishing where you want your lineup to be. You want to get to kind of the point where you feel like you don't have to make regular changes. And the Flyers were able to do that this past week. The game on Monday, they play at home against Vancouver. They rolled the same lineup out there the next day, down to the 4th line had contributed big time in Monday's game. So you're able to roll with that to start the game on Tuesday, just because it was a line that has good chemistry and has been producing. You can say the same thing about Konechny's line with Zegras and Dvorak, that they've had really good chemistry, been producing, continue to make things happen, and that will go a long way to the team being successful coming out of the break if they're able to maintain that. So let's get into the look ahead, which is the schedule for the next week. The Flyers back from the break after this with a game against the Seattle Kraken on Sunday night, 8 o'clock start time there. That's a local 5 p.m. start time, so a little bit of a unique start for the Flyers in Seattle. And then the Flyers will take on the Vancouver Canucks again on Tuesday night, 10 o'clock start time there, as the Flyers have their typical post-holiday road trip, this one being more of a West Coast trip. They go on the road typically. It's the annual Disney on Ice trip that the Xfinity Mobile Arena hosts Disney on Ice for the better part of a week and a half, and the Flyers are on the road. So they're not home again until January 6th when the new year rolls around. So you've got some time for them to be back out on the road. It kind of evens out the schedule a little bit. They've already played, I believe it's 20 home games so far, and that's a pretty high total for only being through 36 games as we hit this holiday break. So they get some time on the road now that's going to even things out. By the time they get home, actually, I believe that game on January 6th is game number 41, which marks the halfway point of the regular season. So you've got that in front of you as they kind of move forward and look to build on things. Our next episode, by the way, so I'm going to bring this into this now. The next episode will be next week, Tuesday night, 7:30, ahead of that Vancouver game. I included the Vancouver game in the look ahead anyway, even though it won't have happened yet when we do this next, just because it's on the slate and kind of limited action as we go into things. And maybe what we'll talk about more, because there only have been one game played, aside from what happened in the Seattle game and if they can maintain what they've done going into the break, is kind of looking ahead to some of the other things with the new year, where this could go. It's right now, it looks like it's on a good path, obviously, but there's a lot of things to consider, and we'll see where it goes from there. But that's where we're going to leave you with this one. The Flyers, as I mentioned, in a really, really great spot, kind of unexpectedly in a really great spot, because they, you just potentially didn't think anyway that they would, that they would be in a, let alone in a playoff spot. They're in second place in the Metropolitan Division. That's certainly unexpected. And now you got to see if they can maintain it and see if they can't get to that next level. So that's going to do it for this week's show. Thanks for tuning in on this Christmas Eve as the Flyers hit the holiday break on a high note. More to come following the holiday break and as the new year approaches in 2026. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and wish everybody a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next week on the Flyers Files podcast. Once again, follow along with me at Kevin_Durso on Twitter X platform, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all the places you can get coverage. And similarly, follow the BFA Sports platform. There's lots of shows that we've got going on covering, I'm covering the Flyers, covering the Sixers, covering the Phillies, Nick Earnshaw's show, Earnshaw Radio, all of the above. So follow along with everything. And like I said, have a great holiday break, and we'll see you on the other side next week